I'll just admit everybody.
Recording in progress.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
Welcome.
All right. Well, it's 7 o'clock and I see some of the moms showing up. So I just wanted to welcome everybody to the Peloton Moms Book Club virtual author chat with Pam Jenoff for The Woman with the Blue Star. And it is being special guest hosted tonight by Zibby Owens. Thank you, ladies, for coming. And I'm going to take a quick moment to introduce Zibby. For those of you who don't know Zibby, she is the creator and host of the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. And it's been one of Oprah's favorite podcasts for 2 years in a row. She's the CEO and founder of the Moms Don't Have Time to. She's formed her own media company and has multiple podcasts. She did an anthology about moms don't have time to during the quarantine of COVID. She has, I believe, another anthology coming out this November. She does all of the things. She has her hands in all of the pies, and she does a lot of things with Good Morning America and gives great book recommendations. So we hope that you guys will check out her podcast in the future. And with that, Zibby, welcome.
Thank you. Wow, my hand in all the pies. You must have been you could have been in my kitchen earlier today. Like, were there secret cameras? Anyway, thank you for that. And thanks for having me at the Peloton Moms Book Club. I was much more active on my Peloton and have really gotten off the beaten path. And I don't know, I noticed that my dog's water bowl was on there, the other day. And I'm like, I wonder how long it's been there. Anyway, I am thrilled to be interviewing Pam Jenoff tonight, whose book was absolutely amazing, The Woman with the Blue Star. And I'm so excited to talk to her about that tonight. And this will become a podcast on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, the audio. So just letting you know that, but not the Q&A, just this part. So I will read Pam's bio from her website. Here, Pam, say hi before I launch into everything. Oh. There she is. Okay, so Pam Jenoff. Pam Jenoff was born in Maryland and raised outside Philadelphia. She attended George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and Cambridge University in England. Upon receiving her master's in history from Cambridge, she accepted an appointment as special assistant to the Secretary of the Army. The position provided a unique opportunity to witness and participate in operations at the most senior levels of government, including helping the families of the Pan Am Flight 103 victims secure their memorial at Arlington National Cemetery, observing recovery efforts at the site of the Oklahoma City bombing, and attending ceremonies to commemorate the 50th anniversary of World War II at sites such as Bastogne and Corregidor. Is that right?
Very good. Very good.
Oh, thank you. That's like 10 years of French in school for nothing. Anyway, following her work at the Pentagon, Pam moved to the State Department. In 1996, she was assigned to the U.S. Consulate in Krakow, Poland. It was during this period that Pam developed her expertise in Polish-Jewish relations and the Holocaust. Working on matters such as preservation of Auschwitz and the restitution of Jewish property in Poland, Pam developed close relations with the surviving Jewish community. Pam left the Foreign Service in 1998 to attend law school and graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. She worked for several years as a labor and employment attorney, both at a firm and in-house in Philadelphia, and now teaches law school at Rutgers. Pam is the New York Times bestselling author of The Woman with the Blue Star, The Lost Girls of Paris, The Orphan's Tale, The Commandant's Girl, The Diplomat's Wife, The Ambassador's Daughter, The Last Summer at Chelsea Beach, The Winter Guest, The Things We Cherished, Almost Home, and A Hidden Affair. She also authored a short story in the anthology Grand Central Original Post-War Stories of Love and Reunion. She lives outside Philadelphia with her husband, 3 children, dog, cat, lizard, and bird. So, welcome, Pam.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm introduction. And I'm such a fan, Zibby, of your podcast and everything you do and all of your lists and everything. It's just you're a force, and we're so grateful, all the authors. So.
Oh, thank you so much.
As well as a reader, a consumer.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I am a fan of yours too, and, consumed this at rapid speed. I absolutely loved it. And I haven't really stopped thinking about some of the images in the book that have really sort of been haunting me that you described in such detail. But why don't you tell, I'm not sure who in the book club actually read the book, and a lot of people have their, their video's off, so I can't see a show of hands. All right, well, Sue read it, so that's good news for all of us. Sue and Lauren, all right. Barb, great. So for those who might not have read it, would you mind giving a brief overview of the book? And then I want to hear about what inspired you to write it.
So can I do the second part by way of lead in? So let me tell you what inspired me to write it, which will set the stage for the story. Is that okay?
You know what? You do however you want. I'll just be here.
So The Woman with the Blue Star came out May 4th. It's my 11th book. And I write a lot of books set around World War II and the Holocaust, material that I've worked with for about 25 years from when I was a diplomat, and I'm happy to say more about that if folks want. But I have a deep love for the era. But the stories I write, they don't come from my personal experiences or even really people that I met. They come from stories that I find when I'm researching and I'm kind of looking for what am I going to write about next. And so when I'm looking for an idea, I'm looking for the gasp. I'm looking for the moment, because if something will make me gasp after all these years of working with the war, then I'm hopeful I'm onto something that readers will feel the same way about, that will illuminate, that will teach and inspire, that we really haven't heard about before. In this case, for The Woman with the Blue Star, the gasp was the discovery of a group of Jewish people in Lviv, Poland, who survived World War II by hiding in a sewer. And I don't mean that they hid in that sewer on their way out of town. They hid and lived in that sewer for more than a year. And hearing this, I had so many questions. Who were these people and how had they survived and what were their lives like and who had helped them? And I was particularly taken from an anecdote from the true story. I don't write true stories, but an anecdote from the true story in which a young girl looked up through the sewer grate and she saw a girl her own age buying flowers. And she was so taken by the disparity between her life and the girl above. Her mother said to her, "Someday there will be flowers for you." It was this kind of promise. And so when I heard that, I imagined what would it have been like if the girl below and the girl above had the chance to get to know one another, and what would that have meant for both of their lives? So that's a very long introduction to say that The Woman with the Blue Star is about Sadie. She's a young Jewish woman who is living in the sewer, hiding with her parents, although she increasingly becomes isolated. And one day she looks up and she sees Ella on the street. Now, Ella is not Jewish. And at first glance, Ella has it pretty good. She's from an affluent family. She's not being persecuted. But when we look closer, we see that Ella has lost all of her family except for her really horrible stepmother, who is consorting with the Germans, and her ex-fiance, who hasn't even told her that he's back from the war. And so Ella has this really deep loneliness and need. And when she sees Sadie through the sewer grate, there's a very powerful connection between them.
Wow. Well, the image of the flowers and that moment, I mean, the whole thing was just so random. It's almost hard to comprehend, right? That two people living on opposite sides of town could have such divergent paths and sort of have to face off with just this barrier between them and the lengths to which people will go. I mean, it was amazing, these stories of survival and the way that you put us sort of in that moment at the time and everything. And it's also such a great show of female friendship and what people are willing to do for each other. So tell me a little bit more about developing that relationship between the two girls and how you made that believable and how you treated that, and how to get people who are to relate and yet have it work so well on the page.
One of the things I love best about historical fiction is taking women who through normal history would have walked on a very set path, and suddenly through war or catastrophe, they are thrown off that path and they're tested and challenged in ways that they never thought possible. And it's really fun to see how they grow and respond in those situations. And one of those parts that's super fun is taking women who through normal circumstances never would have met, never would have crossed paths, but because of the war, they do, and seeing what happens with them. Now, specifically with Ella and Sadie, I like to keep it very real. So if you read the author's note for The Woman with the Blue Star, you will know that I turned in a clunker of a first draft. I mean, after 11 books, I handed in a book and my editor was like, no. I'm like, no? Like, no. And so I had to rewrite this book in 5 months. And part of what changed was my first draft was only from Sadie's point of view. It was only the girl in the sewer. And it was my genius editor, who's always right, who said, we need to see Sadie's point of view and Ella's point of view. So that's how it kind of evolved. And I wasn't sure. It was difficult to open up to Ella.
I know. I loved in your note how you were like, yeah, like we're gonna go there. Or you had something funny you said, like, yep, not gonna lie, like this is really what happened.
Oh,
It was
so true. So true.
so after 11 books, like take us back to the beginning of how did you start writing historical fiction? Like what appealed to you about the genre and how did you sort of tackle the first book and keep getting better and better until we end up with these really vibrant characters today?
Thank you. So I was one of those little kids who always wanted to be a writer. And it was always novels, like never short stories, never poems. I was like, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book. And then all through those many years when I lived in Europe and I went to school, I had plenty of time to write, but I never got started. You know what I mean? Like you've got this project, you want to get off the ground and you can't. And it was always the novel for me. I had lots of novels shoved in drawers. And the turning point in my life was actually 9/11. I had worked for the State Department and I came back from the State Department and I went to law school and I graduated from law school in Philadelphia and I started working at a big law firm on September 4th, 2001, right? So it's a big deal. It's coming up this week. And 1 week later, I started on a Tuesday. One Tuesday later, 9/11 happened. I was sitting at my desk at a law firm and I love attorneys. I make baby lawyers. I teach law school. Like that's what I do. I think it's a wonderful profession. But that was the moment when I said, I have a deeper dream of being a novelist. And if I don't get started, like I could have been a 9/11 victim. It never would have happened. And so it was that life mortality moment. And I took a course at Temple Night School in Philadelphia. And I teach at Rutgers, but this course was at Temple. And the course was actually called Write Your Novel This Year. And I started to work on a book. And I didn't set out to write historical fiction, Zibby. I started out with 2 first chapters in that workshop. One was a historical and one was a present day. And people responded more to the historical. And so that became my first book, The Commandant's Girl. So I started in that writing workshop, which was a wonderful experience. But just because I joined a workshop didn't mean I was like off to the races. It was 5 years and 39 publisher rejections, before I got accepted on that first book. And bear in mind, I was a new attorney at a big law firm. I had $1,000 a month in student loan debt. So I couldn't just go be a writer. So I used to write the books from like 5 to 7 in the morning before I went to the firm. So that was kind of how it all came together. But I will tell you, I always read a lot of historical fiction growing up. So maybe it was fated, So.
Wow. People talk about how crazy it is to work at law firms and how you have no time to yourself. So, that is so all encompassing that the fact that you could do it simultaneously is particularly impressive. So why did you not give up after 48 rejections?
Well, you know what happened? So we submitted my first book, Commandant's Girl, everywhere, and we get all of these rejections. And then the agent I worked with at the time, he said, well, go write another book and we'll sell that one first and then we'll kind of bootstrap this in. And I was like, as if it were that easy, but I'm diligently working on another book for 11 months. And on April 8th, 2005, I was at the firm. It was a Friday afternoon and the caller ID pops up on my work phone. And even then people emailed, it wasn't all phone calls. So I picked up the phone, it was my agent. And I said, are you calling to fire me? Because this poor guy had not made a dime off of my work. And he said no. And then I thought he was calling to yell at me for not finishing that second book. And he said no. He said, I'm calling to tell you I sold the first book. And it turned out that one publisher that we didn't even know was still reading it made a tiny little offer for Commandant's Girl, and off we went. But I don't know. I honestly believe that the only difference between me and anyone who's not published, is largely just keeping going. Because in that original writer's workshop, there were many better writers than me. And that's not modesty. I'm being straight up. There were some great writers in that workshop. And I think sometimes that the only reason I'm here is just because I kept knocking. So.
Well, I mean, if you're like a salesman trying to sell milk and it's spoiled milk, it doesn't matter how many doors you knock on.
Analogy.
Right? No, I mean, you have to have something.
No, it's true. I mean, I didn't just keep knocking. I kept doing 5 a.m. But it was definitely that more perspiration than, however Ben Franklin says it, more perspiration than inspiration. I don't know.
Wow. So you started on your journey, you got that published, and then fast forward to today, when you wrote all those other books along the way, was it still those anecdotes every so often and just the stories that you happened to find and hear, and you kept taking them, and then all of a sudden now you've written 2 handfuls of books, and it's amazing.
So I started with Commandant's Girl, and I actually wound up writing a sequel and a prequel to that book, and that was really fun. And then I wrote a couple modern books. I wandered around a few different publishers. I sort of had a long and winding road. But I always came back to World War II and the stories. And there were always stories. And there are moments, there are moments when we've looked at it and I've said, is World War II played out? You know what I mean? I will tell you honestly, it was right after The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna and All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. And those two books,
good. Yeah.
Both of those books were
both of those were so good. Yeah.
And I looked around, I'm like, well, it can't be done any better. How do we do this? I looked around, but then there were still stories to be told and a great appetite with readers. And so, some of my books have been modern. I wrote one book that was set on the home front during World War II, which I particularly love. It's called The Last Summer at Chelsea Beach. And then I'm back to stories during the war. And it's always, it's just that little nugget of history that sets me off. If I think it's amazing and I can do it respectfully, then that's kind of where I start.
Did you ever think about this being YA or middle grade or anything? Because you know how sometimes when you have a protagonist who's younger, now all of a sudden that means you're in the YA category. This is maybe too talking shop situation, but
no, it's true.
Because I read part of this out loud to my daughter who's 8, but she likes me to read whatever I'm reading that night to her before we go to bed. And not to say it's for an 8-year-old, obviously it's a lot of complex themes and everything, but she was really interested because it's someone close to her age going through something. So I don't know if you had considered it.
No, it's a good point. So my favorite books are kids and YA because I think those authors are just deities. 25 years ago, I worked at Borders for a summer and I was like, can I please work in the YA section? I love those books. I don't have the voice for kids in YA. And so for some reason, my protagonists tend to be younger. They tend to be that age of women. But I don't like genre. When Commandant's Girl came out, Publishers Weekly called it historical romance at its finest. And I was like, romance? It doesn't have a romance. So I don't really always love the genre thing, but my books can be read by YA. It depends on the parent's sensitivity. So one of my 11-year-old twins has read 3 of my books already, and that's fine. They're very PG-13. There's not a lot of graphic anything. I write my books so that my mom can read them. So I think it's okay. Most of them are pretty okay for the younger set, but I'm happy if they read them. Yes.
And did you where was your family around World War II? What's your personal story?
So interestingly, all 4 of my grandparents are from that, area known as the Pale, and that kind of Poland, could be Ukraine, could be Russia, based on what year it was, right? And when I lived in Poland, I was there for almost 2.5 years. I would always try and take trains east to see where my family was from. It was very, very difficult. All of my grandparents, and I should say great-grandparents in some cases, because 3 of my grandparents were born here, but all of my grandparents and great-grandparents were in America by the time the war happened. So I lost no blood family in the Holocaust. Now, my one grandmother, whose story is fabulous, she grew up, her family fled Russia for China when she was 2, and she lived in China for 20 years. And she came to America by way of Japan, Hawaii, San Francisco, and across. And I wrote about her story in the Grand Central anthology. I sort of borrowed her story, but I didn't lose family in the Holocaust. Now, when I lived in Poland, I became extremely close to the elderly survivors who were still living in that part of the world. And so they were like grandparents to me as well.
Wow. I was chatting with a woman today whose grandparents also, um, they were born around the time. Let me see if I get the dates right. Anyway, they were born there, and her parents were born in DP camps. Both of her parents in different camps, and anyway, she actually also had really interesting stories about, and I don't want to give anything away, but babies and having families in the Holocaust time and era and all this stuff. So anyway, I should put you guys in touch at some
That would be
point.
amazing. That would be amazing.
So having lived through these characters' eyes, right, and all of it, the mom, the dad, the Lily, and I mean everybody is Sadie. And what did you learn about the period that you, even though you've read 8 million things about it, I'm sure, and written and all this stuff and researched and met people, like where did it take you that you hadn't expected?
Well, obviously the sewer was kind of a revelation to me, but it wasn't just this sewer. It was, first of all, it brought together people who were from really different backgrounds, who didn't know each other above ground, right? And they're suddenly kind of living in this very cramped space. The detail of their lives, that there were books, and how did they have light, and how did they celebrate, the Sabbath, observe the Sabbath, and all of those things. But the other piece that I really took away from this was the man who helped them. So there was a fellow named in real life named Leopold. In my book, he's Pavel, and he was a sewer worker, and he was not a particularly honorable person. Like, he had been a thief before the war, but he met this family, and originally he agreed to help for money, and then they ran out of money, and he still kept helping. And he and his wife would go to all these markets around the city to get food without attracting attention and just risk their own family. And he was a great hero. And after the war, he died not more than 2 years after the war, because he and his daughter were riding bikes and a truck came barreling toward them, and he pushed his young daughter out of the way to save her life. So even then he was a hero. So it's these individual stories that are really so moving.
Oh my gosh. Do you already know what story you're going to work on next?
I am working on I'm always So here's my rule. I don't let myself start a new book until one is finished, because it's like you can't play with that shiny new toy in the corner until you clean up your toys, right? That's very important. But I never take a break. I'm pretty much right back into it once I've got that idea. So I am working on a book inspired by a true story of the only known train sabotage of a train on the way to Auschwitz. So there was a train going from Belgium to Auschwitz that was sabotaged to try and rescue people. And so that's what I'm looking at fictitiously in my new book.
Wow. What happened in real life?
They did get some people off, but obviously there's great cost. And so my book looks at both the people who were on the train, and again, my characters are fictitious, but it's both people who are on the train and people who were engaged in the sabotage.
Well, Rachel in the chat is very excited about this. We have a big.
So it's not going to be out till early 2023. And I'm going to be honest, that sounds really far away to you, and it sounds too close to me.
It's close. You have to step up.
I'm trying to hustle. I'm hustling. 5 a.m. writer. 5 a.m. writing has become 4 a.m. writing. That's not a place I like to go.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, the 4s are tough.
Right? It's a crazy difference. I was telling my kids, like, 5 is awesome, but 4 is terrible.
Yeah. It's a fine line. It's a fine line. In a minute, we can bring all the questions in from the chat. So as you all are listening, if you have questions, there's already a lot in the chat, but add any questions in here. Everybody's so excited, and we can ask crowdsourced questions tonight. I mean, did you know the ending of this book before, at the beginning? Because I did not see the ending coming until the end.
So let me say this. I'm sure you've heard this,
Oh,
Zibby.
someone just asked the question in the chat. I did not get that from the chat. I
That's
literally.
hilarious. Great minds, great minds. So here's the thing, you know this probably from other writers. There's these two types of writers, the plotters and the pantsers. And the plotters are the dear souls that write everything sequentially and they make it look nice before they move on. That's not me. I'm a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. So I like throw words at a screen in a random order. It's terrible. But the reason I'm telling you this is I'm never sure if you say, like, did you know at the beginning what the ending is? There isn't really a beginning or ending for me. It kind of all happens at once. So it's very hard for me to go back chronologically and think about what I knew when. I often know an opening scene and I often have some idea where I wind up at the end. And in between, there's like one or two scenes that I call high moments. And they're little lighthouses that kind of help me get along the way. So I probably knew how the book was going to end roughly, but maybe not who,
Got it.
right? Okay.
So did you go back and write the prologue later?
I write a rough sketch of the prologue. I'll have like a rough sketch of the prologue, but if you read that prologue and you really don't know who is speaking per se,
Yep.
I don't necessarily know that either, right? I'm just throwing down those words. Someone once said that the plotters use scaffolding to build, but the pantsers, it's like an archaeological dig where you're picking up an object and like dusting it off and trying to see what's there. So that's how it works for me. It's sort of immersive in that way.
Interesting. I like it. Do you have any advice for aspiring authors?
So I do. I think there's kind of three things that are really key. One is discipline, right? And this probably goes to the moms not having time to read, right? So discipline is you know when your best writing time is, and you really have to protect it very zealously because even after all these years, not my beloved mom or my sainted husband who's downstairs taking care of the puppy and the kids right now, nobody says, why don't you go take some writing time, right? People just don't say that to us in our lives. You have to like, and this is mine. And you have to do that a little bit and be flexible and pivot like we all did with COVID, right? So that's one piece, be disciplined. Second piece, be tenacious. And that goes back to that writing workshop and me knocking on the door for, till it opened, because I think that makes a really huge difference. Even when lots of people said, why don't you give this up? It isn't going anywhere. The last piece is ability to revise. So this is where having been an attorney comes in helpful, because when you're an attorney, people like mark up your work and you have to fix it. And I think as a writer, if you can take that feedback from your editor, your agent, your trusted writers, whoever you're getting feedback from, and make the changes in your own way, because often they don't give you solutions, they only give you problems, and you have to figure out the solution. So think ability to revise.
I like it. Excellent.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Pam, for chatting. We're going to keep chatting with everybody here, but for the podcast portion, I'm going to turn it off and, free you from that. So hold on, I'll say goodbye.